Nearly 2 months after Operation Sindoor, there is a great deal of clarity as to what India achieved in targeting and attacking and inflicting damage on Pakistani airfields, military establishments and terror infrastructure. Well, we in the media continue to put the spotlight on the findings that continue to emerge from one of the most important military missions that India has ever conducted in the modern era. But for scholars and students of warfare studies, this is a never-ending story. And that's why Vishnu and I today are very pleased to have with us John Spencer. He's chair of the Urban Warfare Studies desk at the Modern War Institute, who is in India now to actually research Operation Sindoor for himself. And he's been doing the rounds here in India, speaking to think tanks, speaking to people who've been involved as well. John,
welcome to India for starters.
First of all, welcome to India, of course.
Thank you.
But why are you here? Operation Sindoor was 2 months ago. We do know there are many questions, but what specifically are you looking at here?
It's hard to say. I'm looking for the lessons that India learned. I'm looking for the lessons that Pakistan learned, or we hope that they learned. I study war for a living all around the world, and I think the world quickly moved past this one, although there are many things that were basically game changers. When an entire nation, as big as India, changes their strategic doctrine, that's important. But the dominance of the weapons, really every aspect of it.
India believes that there is a threshold for warfare under nuclear warfare. There are those who suggest that pushing that threshold or sticking to this model comes with a huge set of dangers given how unpredictable Pakistan is. What is your opinion on the threshold India believes warfare can be conducted in against Pakistan?
Yeah, I think that we have lived in an era where it's almost taboo to even think about. And again, why this operation was so important is that, of course, they're threatening nuclear, rattling the nuclear saber, as we say, that Pakistan does and other countries as well do, is very reckless. And nobody wants to see that. But the idea that is a carte blanche to do things like proxy terror warfare that we've seen countries do is also reckless. So I think that was another important point of this operation when I saw Prime Minister Modi make that not ambiguous, but very clear, like no longer with the nuclear blackmail. We will keep operations limited. And there's actually been an evolution of what nuclear weapons are designed for state survival. Although after World War II, you saw like tactical or nuclear weapons when people thought they would be involved in war. Now it's evolved. That theory has evolved to where they should only be used for survival aspects and not to carry out your things where you want to break the rules just because you have nuclear weapons. This was a bit of strategic clarity and really leadership in this era of, look, we know both sides have nuclear weapons. There are the fear mongers that believe that means nobody can act just because of that umbrella. And I think India showed a lot of independence here and leadership to say no.
In your first few days here, John, and you are still doing the rounds and speaking to people, what have been your big learnings?
One of the things is, war is, most people focus on the two militaries, and I do that, of course, all the technologies, but wars, nations go to war, and it involves not just the militaries, but their political leadership and their society. So really hearing from Indian scholars about what do they believe the lessons were, but also the political element of this is almost not a distraction, but India has such great goals in development. And even what was going on in Kashmir with the development and the 22 million tourists over the last year and how beautiful it is, that's been an interesting kind of strategic environment to the terrorist attack. That was interesting because there's always, what we say, an underlying reason for a war, then there's a triggering moment. Of course, the terrorist attack was the triggering moment of Operation Sindoor, but there's always something else. So learning about that has been interesting in context to understand.
One of the problems we have in India is that on the one hand, we have a great strategic relationship with America. We've got our foreign minister in America right now. But then you had the US CENTCOM chief a couple of days back saying that, look, we need to work with Pakistan because Pakistan helps America in the fight against terror, against ISIS-K. We have a problem in India sort of accepting that because we see Pakistan as being the world's sort of state sponsor of terrorism. Osama bin Laden was over there. So many who attacked America as well. Therefore, how should India look at statements from one of your finest generals?
As you know, I try to stay out of political discussions.
But was it a political point that he was making?
No, it was the relationships are long. And that history of the global war on terrorism, but even you go back to the American involvement in defeating the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, involved Pakistan and the Mujahideen. There's a long history. There are agreements. There are very complex, and I think what we were talking about once on TV is that geopolitics is complex. And each nation, which is actually part of this operation, was strategic independence. In saying, okay, we're not going to do the Indus Treaty if you're not going to be friends, and things like that. The general's comments are more informed than mine, of course. I understand there are many ties, not just the counterterrorism tie, but there are other regional aspects of plans for worst case scenarios, all that is part of that. But that military to military relations is sometimes below the political as well. But we live in a new world.
Yeah.
So I think those relationships, all relationships are changing, and I think what we're all seeing, and I think India is a big part of that, is a turn towards this double game of terrorism. Not just with Pakistan, with Iran and other countries. This administration clearly is different than the past.
Yeah,
John, I want to zoom back into the Operation Sindoor itself, because you're a warfare studies specialist. The last time shots were fired between India and Pakistan was not very long ago. It was in 2019, and we saw a skirmish at that time. 2025, this happened. It was a much more serious escalatory sort of exchange between the two countries. What is your assessment of the actual fighting that took place? The damage that India inflicted was very, very clear. It was also very clear that Pakistan didn't really manage to hit anything, if not anything, at least not the stuff that they said that they did. What is your assessment of the damage and the way India fought?
Yeah. It's a great question, as even in the West, the stories seem to catch on to the wrong stories.
Yeah.
The story here is Indian dominance of the situation, both in control, what we call escalation dominance, but also in restraint. So demonstration of overwhelming military capability, but then controlling the escalation of that. So the fact that India could hit any target it wanted to in Pakistan, and was very selective, is the story. That overwhelming dominance of Pakistan's airspace, its air defenses, and the Chinese weapon systems, because it is essentially a proxy of the Chinese military. So all that test of those technologies, you never know until war puts everything to the test. So that story is Indian, not just their offensive capability, but the dominance of their defensive capability. And that's a story that's still got to get out, is how did India's layered air defenses stop any drone, any missile from hitting the target it wanted to? That's a huge part of this story. So it's just dominance, which is important in war. And I don't believe in that there's a bloodless war, that there should be perfection in any nation in war. But when you show dominance and then it leads to a political decision, which is the other side saying, okay, we don't want any of that, which is that escalation control. That is why I'm here to study on the ground Operation Sindoor.
No, I agree with that assessment entirely, in the fact that it actually ended much sooner perhaps than most people expected, which is my question to you. Shiv was reporting from Kashmir. I was sort of anchoring through this entire thing over here. And I think we both felt, when Pakistan tried mass drone attacks on day 2, that this was actually becoming a full-scale war. Given the number of drones that they brought, the number of interceptions taking place, the number of Indian missile strikes going across, that this is not going to stop that easily, and yet it did. How would you look at the abruptness with which this war, I use that word war, came to an end?
Surprising, to be sure, but clearly a war is a contest of will. We actually say it's an act of force to compel your enemy to do your will. India did that here, so it'll be a case study studied in war colleges around the world, as in this is an example of war for those objectives. I think the information campaign was a big part of that. So the fact that India, even before it struck the 9 terrorist sites, already had the message ready. Like, we did this, these are the exact sites we hit them, this is why we hit them. And then Pakistan decided to retaliate, escalate, and India constantly communicating, which is in a democracy not as easy as people think. For the government and the military to be on the exact same sheet saying the exact same message is another part of that. And why it abruptly stopped so quickly, clearly because there was dominance of military capability. I also think that what I'm studying as well is that difference between 2019 and now, like what changed? Clearly the investments that India made in their defense establishment, the Make in India, the BrahMos, and all of those indigenous systems are validated.
Yeah. As far as Chinese systems are concerned, John, that's one common area of interest from both the United States and India.
Absolutely.
How the Chinese systems, like you said, it's a satellite state, a proxy of the the Chinese government as well. There was a lot of Chinese kit in this fight. Aircraft, missiles, air defense systems, anti-air systems. What is your assessment of that aspect of it?
Yeah, so I'm still researching that part.
Yeah.
As you're right, a lot of people are interested in that, and there's this ideal that China gave Pakistan a degraded version of those assets. And I don't know if that's true. I don't know if they truly just didn't match up against Indian systems. And everybody's always, I say all warfare is asymmetric. You're always trying to overwhelm or outdo the other side. Clearly, though, I mean, this is where I try to do objective as possible. Objectively, Indian systems dominated Chinese systems. Now, whether that was a downgraded version is, I think, still the work to be seen, whether it's the PL-15 or all these other systems. It's definitely a big part of the study.
The other aspect is the emergence of drones as a frontline weapon system, both for India and for Pakistan. But if you look at the hits on terrorist targets, in fact, we did the story just 2 days back, showing a very precise hit on 2 terrorist targets, one in Muzaffarabad in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and one in a place called Kotli. These were clearly struck by loitering drones. We've seen what drones have done in Russia, Ukraine, in that war. We've seen them being used in Armenia and that fight over there as well. But it's changed the nature of warfare here in the subcontinent as well. I mean, how would you look at the evolution of warfare in this part of the world through the prism of drones?
Yeah, it's another aspect, and I've actually been to every one of those locations you just talked about. So Nagorno-Karabakh, where kind of the Turkish and Israeli drones debuted and caught the international attention, although there's a lot more military things happening than just drones, just clearly as an Operation Sindoor. It's an evolution of air power. Of course, it's a cheaper, less risk, I don't think, and I was watching the DGAO talk about, like, this doesn't mean we don't need manned aircraft. This is, again, India's story of dominance here isn't just about having better drones that could do that precision and to make sure that no civilian, to keep it limited and keep from escalation, because that's a big part of it. But it's integrating it all together, because even a drone may be helping a manned aircraft get into where it's going, although in this war as well, again, different than some of the previous incidents, is that neither side, weapons have advanced, so neither side has to breach some of those other taboos of airspace or sovereignty or anything. We can both sides can launch at each other from their own areas. It's changing some of the thinking there. The drones on both sides, though, both capable drones that can get through, and you have to have radar, all these things, but also defending against those. Because Turkish drones were also sent towards India, and to have that layered system, some people take too many lessons from Russia, Ukraine. It's very unique, and this is why I love my job, and I have a lot of job security. Each one has its own context. So, like, why is a drone being so effective in that environment? And then in other environments, like I've been to Gaza a lot recently, and it's less of a factor, although the tactical drones are more important there.
Taking off from this question of drone warfare is, of course, the very unique aspect, and this is obvious to students of war studies like yourself, John, which is that this is the first time that India and Pakistan have been in a conflict with each other, where the largest part of the fighting was done from beyond visual range and from standoff distances within our own airspace, within our own territory, respectively. We can argue, of course, about the impact that each side has, which was very clear. But long-range missiles, loitering munitions and drones. Unlike in 2019, where there were very, very within visual range dogfights actually taking place.
Yep.
So even in just 6 years, that has changed completely.
It has, but again, as the kind of war professor, India gave a master class in integration of joint capabilities, because every one of those aspects, the air is not going to fly without the ground systems. Even the Navy is a critical part of that integration. So you're right, absolutely. But the objectives of the war also. So I live in a world where people take lessons that are very important and then apply them to everything else. You're right, that's a drastic change. We have to record that lesson. But I also understand, and when I saw all the military leaders talking about that together, that was that masterclass in integration of all those systems. But you're right, that standoff and ranges are important depending on what the goal is. I'm an old infantryman, so you still need ground forces depending on if you're securing a border.
Yeah.
We've learned a lot of lessons in modern times of you can't get too dependent on technologies, even if you're talking about ranging things.
And Vishnu broke some excellent details about the Indian Navy's the mission that never happened.
On more than one occasion, as I understand it, the Indian Navy was all set to attack. They stood down in a sense after the orders never came. But they were on more than one occasion set to even sink ships in Karachi dock because the Pakistani Navy never came up to play, never came out to play. How did you see the escalation matrix actually going up? Because short of the Navy opening fire, we did see the Indian Air Force take out their airfields, including their runways, their hangars as well. That was a huge jump in the matrix, would you agree?
It was a huge jump, but also a demonstration of capability, just to say, this is what we can do, you should de-escalate, basically. So it is that escalating, which in my world is hard to convince people of. You're escalating to de-escalate.
Right.
You're demonstrating a capability and a weakness on the other side by doing that, absolutely.
But as an infantryman or a former infantryman yourself, you would know about the dangers posed by terrorists and terrorism and those forces. In as much as India has taken out terrorist centers and terrorist hubs, it doesn't take very much to actually rebuild those. In Pakistan, the sponsor of terrorism is not just the Jaish-e-Mohammed or the Lashkar-e-Toiba, it's the ISI, which is the Pakistani state, which is essentially the Pakistani military. Do you believe that enough of a signal has been sent to the bedrock of Pakistani terrorism, which is the Pakistani military establishment?
That's a good question, and I get it a lot on your deterrence, basically. Are you deterring an entire, basically, operation that is sanctioned from the government down? And I've walked every aspect of the 2008 Mumbai attacks. Remember the response after that. You have 2016, 2019. This is definitely sending a message that's never been sent before, which is any terrorist attack will be responded to with overwhelming force. Now, will that deter all the terrorists from continuing operations? I don't think so. But it's done something that is very important, which is ensuring a message is sent on within yourself even, that there is a change here. Any attack will be aggressively responded to, which does change this complete strategic environment. You will hope, but Pakistan has a lot of its own issues, inflation and lots of issues, that you would hope they would give up this state sponsor of terrorism.
Yeah.
The Indian Defense Minister, John, just before we do this interview, was on the phone with his American counterpart, Pete Hegseth. A lot of things were spoken about. The Indian Foreign Minister, like Vishnu said, is in the United States for the Quad meetings as well. Much has been said about one interesting aspect about India reserving the right, to conduct preemptive strikes against Pakistan. And that actually hasn't happened before. India has always been reactive so far. How do you interpret that statement, that India reserves the right for preemptive strikes against targets in Pakistan?
I mean, it's a refreshing bit of strategic leadership. Something every nation has that right. So the double standards, both the double standards of the terrorism game, but also the double standard of what you can do in response to them is critical to peace. Our administration now and others, even right now, you have peace through strength. And that's a big part of that. So it's not waiting to be attacked. I will show strength, just like Israel and the United States did with Iran recently. That's an important part, and written into like the United Nations Charter, Article 51. Like, I don't have to wait till I'm attacked to respond. That shouldn't be the way that nations react and act in general, let alone doing the terrorism and the proxy warfare. But I think it's a refreshing bit of strategic leadership.
Yeah. India has also weaponized water this time around with the Indus Waters Treaty.
Yep.
How is that a significant part of the extended Op Sindoor, if you like?
I've been looking at that and learning that India had been asking for years to renegotiate the Indus Treaty and the percentage that was going to India versus Pakistan, and there was just no communication. But in the preamble of that is about friendship between two nations, and if one nation is just constantly sending and doing terrorist attacks, I would understand how you would want to not continue that the spirit of that agreement. I think it's a big factor. Again, Pakistan has a lot of issues, and you would think that for the prosperity, right, development and things like that, if you want, which is a big focus of what I've been learning about India's development, not just in Make in India, but the digital, the infrastructure, everything is a part of that. Absolutely an output of Operation Sindoor was, look, if you're going to continue this, then we don't have these friendship agreements.
Yeah. Final round of questions, John. The ceasefire Operation Sindoor has become it's become a bit of a political football between India and the United States. We've seen the US president take credit for it repeatedly. India has, of course, completely outright said that this had nothing to do with the United States. It was because of what India did to those airfields and those hangars, like Vishnu said. Not from a political perspective, but from what you've seen as a warfare specialist. How did that ceasefire happen?
So, from objectively, what I've observed is that India published every minute of every call that was made. From the beginning of the operation to the very end of the operation. And that it was, I think the Pakistan DGMO attempted a call, that didn't work, so a few hours later it made the call. Like, that's about as objective as you can be. Although I do believe this information space is critical, and that level of transparency about the calls that were made and the operations, what they did and what they didn't do, is all very important, and why, again, I'm here to study it, because that level of transparency and clarity you don't really see in other places.
Yeah. Just a final question. I've been an observer of the Indo-US strategic relationship from being a relationship which didn't exist 30 odd years back to one which is fairly incredible in terms of technology sharing, intelligence sharing. It's premised on several agreements which have been difficult to negotiate, but we worked through them. Do you see that relationship, military to military from a technology standpoint, growing? And do you actually see India acquiring offensive American platforms such as fighter aircraft? I
would love to see that, and I know that you guys, both of you guys, have covered like the J-35, F-35. I would love to see that. I would love to see the $500 billion trade agreement that's been discussed. All of that. I think these are two great democracies leading around the world, and that closer ties, mill-to-mill exchanges, technology advancements. I mean, what India is doing with AI, with even lasers to combat drones, I'm sure there's a lot of people interested in that. So I think it's very positive, and I think that's a very likely, I never say if things are going to happen, but it's very likely, and I would wish for it.
The fact that we have, that we have Russia as friends, and that we've got S-400 missiles which did brilliantly in Op Sindoor, would essentially mean, since India is not giving up on that weapon system, that we will never see the F-35 here. America is clear. The S-400 cannot be anywhere close to an F-35. You don't want a whiff of the F-35's radar signature, however small it may be. And we maintain this independence and this neutrality in our foreign policy. America has a problem with that, obviously. I can understand that. But then how do you see Washington accepting where India is? Because, there are historical factors.
So I saw the Minister of Defense answer that question about how many Russian air defense systems do you have? How many did you have before? How many are you going to have in the future? So I just, objective person would, I think the world has seen how, like the S-300, how it doesn't perform well, or even the Chinese version of it doesn't perform well. And the defense minister said that would be, as India continues to go to Make to India, you want to get to that 90% made in India. So I think some of that planning will contribute towards that, but I'm not in those weeds.
Well, John, this has been a lot of fun, and obviously we learned a lot as well. It's good to see someone in the trenches trying to squeeze as much as they can out of Operation Sindoor from a learnings perspective as they possibly can, and you're in it here in India. So thank you very much. Looking forward to reading your work on Operation Sindoor, which hopefully will be out in the next few weeks. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you.
This was fun.
Thanks.
Thanks.